Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very tall and senior corporate leader and a film producer from Connecticut, USA, Mr. Mike Critelli. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Mike is the co-founder and chief executive officer of MoveFlux Corporation. He's a retired chief executive officer from Pitney Bowes, and he's an entrepreneur, a healthcare consultant, a feature film producer, and a speaker. So, Mike, before we go into all the work that you're doing, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Well, I've had many detours along the way from where I thought I was going to be. My parents, I grew up in Rochester, New York. My mother particularly thought I would become an attorney, which I did for 19 years, coming out of Harvard Law School. And then in 1993, the chief executive of Pitney Bowes asked me if I'd be willing to make a career change, which I did. By the way, I should say I also ran HR for 3 years in the early 1990s, along with being the general counsel. I took that on, and for the next 15 years, I began as a group president, and then for the last 12 and a half years, became CEO and then executive chairman. After I retired, I engaged in a number of entrepreneurial pursuits, one of which, as you mentioned, was a feature film called From the Rough, which I came up with the treatment. My son Mike wrote the screenplay, and we assembled a team, and it got to theaters in 2014, and it's still out there on Amazon Prime and several other platforms.
Well, I'm going to look for it on Amazon Prime as soon as we finish our conversation. Thank you for telling us about that. So, Mike, when I was reading about you and preparing for our conversation, I was fascinated to see that your goal is to empower people to manage their health, learning, mobility, and career well-being. Tell me a little more about this.
Yeah, many CEOs and many senior executives take employees as they find them. But I always use the comparison to competitive sports, which is a true meritocracy. And great teams and great athletes are heavily focused on their health and their safety. And health is considered really foundational to a high-performance athlete and a high-performance culture. And if you don't have, you can have the greatest players in the world, but if they're unable to be on the field at peak performance, you don't get the benefit of having their services. So I always felt that investing in health enhanced shareholder value, which I believe it does. And talk about well-being, I think we get over into the mental and emotional and social well-being components. And by the way, the reason I made the feature film, it was about diversity, a Black woman who coached mostly white athletes at a historically Black college. But what I really was intrigued with was her ability as a PhD in human performance and sports science to get maximum performance by getting people to believe in themselves. And that was the tagline when the film was released. It's all about believing. And people who are believed and committed and passionate can overcome teams and individuals that are more talented. So I work very, very hard to get people to believe in themselves and to think ambitiously about what was possible. I was helped when I was 15 years old by a random conversation with a debate judge who told me I could be good if I got training. I did, and that changed my life. So I've always tried to be that catalyst for making people believe they can do things they don't believe possible.
Well said. You also mentioned that some of the very important life lessons you learned during your childhood that continue to shape your decisions today. Tell me a little bit about these lessons.
Yeah, I had two loving parents, but they brought different strengths to me. I remember when I was 7 years old, a conversation that's the significance of it was, in terms of the subject, was unimportant. But the way my dad did it, I misbehaved at a party. He didn't yell at me. He didn't say anything right away. He walked into my bedroom late at night, spoke very softly to me, and he said, "Here's why your behavior was inappropriate. Here's what you didn't understand." He treated me like an adult. And I thought the combination of a nurturing conversation done on somebody else's home turf in a soft-spoken voice that was loving would have a lot more impact than being harsh. So I learned that that was a great leadership style. Meet people where they were, talk to people as if they were equals. And I got a lot out of people that way. My mother taught me something different. She was a short, very aggressive woman, although she was also relatively soft-spoken. And I remember her lecturing somebody at the Department of Motor Vehicles about being a bad public servant and saying that she was going to go on talk radio to shame them. And I realized that individual citizens have a lot of power in dealing with government if you can use the right levers. But I learned many other lessons, but those two, and particularly the tone with which they did it, really stuck with me as an adult.
Amazing. Thank you. And how did your own upbringing in a very frugal household influence your views on resourcefulness and sustainability?
Yeah, thank you. I realized that very often people, first of all, people do not need lavish surroundings if they have a feeling of love and camaraderie and teamwork. Pitney Bowes, for most of its history, was in what I would call second-rate facilities in rundown neighborhoods. And I did not travel most of my time there, except for a period after 9/11 in private planes. And even then, it was at the demand of my board. But we didn't care about that. We didn't have to pay people the most. We created an environment where people wanted to come to work because they were mission driven and they were driven by the friendships that they made with other people. And I realized that was much more important than throwing a lot of money at them. And we didn't lose people for the most part because we didn't pay enough. If we lost people that we didn't want to lose, it was because they didn't feel valued. And I realized that that carried a lot of weight. As a CEO, I met with people well down in the organization. And one guy I asked, who was a very highly sought after attorney, I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Because I can meet with you every 8 weeks. If I were in another company, I'd never be able to meet with the CEO." So I paid a lot of attention to those intangibles.
Well,
and that's something I learned growing up.
Yeah, really well said and great response. So let's talk a little bit more about Pitney Bowes, where you were the CEO and then you said you were the chairman as well. What were some of your key takeaways from your time at Pitney Bowes, especially when it comes to leadership and culture?
Well, Pitney Bowes had a well-established culture of communication between senior people and frontline people. So one of the most important things that we were able to do was draw on the wisdom of frontline employees, particularly sales and service and customer care, because these were the people that were hearing from our customers every day. And so I went straight to those individuals. I didn't have the filters of my staff and various other stakeholders. I dealt directly with the people who were, and also I dealt with the customers directly. So that was one of our strengths, was our connectedness to 2 million businesses every day, all day. The second thing I realized was that innovation and business opportunity doesn't come necessarily in $1 billion chunks, but you can get there in 10, $100 million chunks. and get there faster. And in fact, one of the benefits of our health program, we were saving $50 million a year in healthcare costs that other companies comparably sized were having to pay. So that's the equivalent of having a $500 million business that was easier to be successful in than trying to start another $500 million business.
Right.
We paid a lot of attention, and goes back to your question about frugality. The pennies added up.
Correct.
About $230 million in ancillary fees from our leasing portfolio. By the time I retired, when I started, it was around $5 million.
Amazing, amazing. And what, again, it was fascinating when reading about you, that you took on significant roles in transportation and healthcare outside of your corporate responsibilities. Why did you do this, and what were your learnings?
Well, transportation was really driven by the fact that I was commuting by train to the office. And in 1985, the CEO called me in and he said, you have the inside track to be the general counsel, but your community service record is very thin. So I said, I've got to get involved with transportation. He connected me to the local business council. I worked under a McKinsey partner. And what I learned about transportation were two things. Number one, the system only worked if every component of the end-to-end system was working properly. So one of the very unglamorous parts of rail travel was parking. So I focused a lot on access to parking spaces. And I learned that the system worked or didn't work based on very small details. And the same was true in the commuter experience on the train. Did the engineers make announcements? Was it quiet? Did people have the right kinds of electrical outlets on the train? Did they have good scheduling? I brought all of those insights in, and continue what I told you about my mother. I was able to get high-level access to get a lot of change done really as a single individual. Relative to healthcare, that came out of my work in HR. And I learned one thing from one study, which is that there was very little relationship between what the US spent on healthcare and the kind of health outcomes it produced. So I to focus on keeping healthy people healthy, on helping patients navigate when they were in the healthcare system, and on really rewarding high quality care. The other thing I did was borrow from consumer marketing to give people rewards for healthy behaviors. So all of that came together, and I started to get known outside of Pitney Bowes.
Wonderful. Mike, now let's talk about some other aspects of the amazing work that you do. Can you explain the seventh generation principle and how it influences your work and legacy?
That's a very good question. My goal is to do one or both of two things, either to have some impact on my lifetime that stays for 175 or 200 years, or that perhaps gets discovered after my lifetime and has a life well beyond that. And it's got to be something that's timeless. And think about movies, because I made a feature film. There are two movies that in America seem to be timeless. One is Casablanca, which was made in 1942. Another was It's a Wonderful Life, done in 1946. Casablanca was believed to be a very popular movie at the time. It's a Wonderful Life did not do well commercially, but we watch them every year, many, many times when people get a chance to see them. My movie was made with that in mind, and everything I did, I'd like somebody to pick it up 100 years from now and say, that still makes sense, as opposed to, being an influencer on TikTok or Instagram, where I'm forgotten about 2 weeks after I have a lot of followers.
Great response. You also do a lot of work with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
and other health-related initiatives. Tell me how has this influenced your views on preventive care?
Yeah, if you look at most chronic and late stage diseases, I
Mm,
believe they start with nutrition and other and stress,
mm,
and they are diseases that are caused by inflammation.
mm,
And there's a doctor, an oncologist, who's written a book with this theory. His name is Dr. David Agus,
mm,
Agus, whom I met through working on a board with him.
mm,
His book was called The End of Illness. And he said in almost every case where you have cancer, where you have diabetes, where you eventually get to Alzheimer's,
mm,
people start out with bad dieting and high stress,
mm,
and they get inflammatory responses, which eventually cause, and in the case of cancer, for example, the cancers thrive on glucose, on too much sugar.
mhm,
So, and diabetes, Alzheimer's is considered by Brown University to be type 3 diabetes.
mm,
So you've got to take care of yourself when you're still not in dire straits with acute, late stage chronic or acute
mm,
condition. So I
mm,
believe very strongly in investing to keep healthy people healthy.
mm. Well said. And how do you apply the lesson of minimizing the risk of losing in your current endeavors?
Um, I would put it a little bit differently. If I am going to lose, let's say, not get a customer or not get a product that people want to buy,
Mm,
I want to minimize the amount that I spend before I learn that. I'm a great believer in the philosophy articulated in the book, The Lean Startup,
yeah.
where Eric Ries talked about you either you either succeed or you get validated learning to
Mm,
minimize the scope of failure. What people
mm,
don't realize, for example, about Pitney Bowes and our secure metering
mm,
system was we didn't make a foolproof system that
mm,
could never be hacked. We
mm,
created a system of containment where the economics of breaking through and compromising only got you access to one postage meter with very limited capacity.
mm,
So you're going to fail if you do entrepreneurial things. You just
mm,
want to fail fast and fail in small doses and learn from it.
mm. Well said. I have time for three more questions for you. Mike, how do you approach decision making when faced with less traveled paths that may not immediately be financially rewarding?
Well, I would only work, sometimes I get it wrong. I think commercially I didn't make as much money on the film, but I
Mm,
focused on what I had to do. And when I go into a new field, I always say, what do I have to make sure that I secure? And in the
mm,
case of the film, my wife even said to me, "Your name is going to be on this film forever. Make
mm,
sure it's a great film." That's
mm,
like to make money on it, but more importantly, let's make sure that it's a product we're proud of. And my son and I
mm.
are very proud of having our names on this because it's going to be there forever.
Forever.
The second thing I try to do is learn from not only people in the field, but analogous
Mm,
disciplines. And in healthcare, I was an outsider, but
mm,
I learned from somebody who was a researcher at Dartmouth about the fact that investing to keep healthy people healthy produced better results than spending more
mm,
money on healthcare.
mm, mm,
Um, and I try to bring in, a mix of people, some of whom are in the discipline and others who come up with creative solutions from outside of it.
mm. Well said. So, two more questions. My next question is, how do you balance having a significant impact while maintaining low visibility?
Well, a lot of this is my personality and
Yeah.
style.
Mm,
Uh, I really try not to be intimidating. And in fact, when I was an attorney, I was very successful as an investigator because people were taken off their guard because I acted very nice to them. I was very polite. So part of this is to not be a celebrity. And I think people who see their names on the front pages of newspapers, business magazines, the internet, they typically seek that out. I didn't. I don't. I like the idea of really being a non-celebrity. I had a lot to do with postal reform legislation that was enacted in 2006, and my name never appeared in anywhere in the media.
Okay.
But I was invited to the bill signing ceremony because behind the scenes I had a lot to do with it, and I could go my normal life.
Well said.
And my kids could live their normal lives as well, which is very, very important.
Absolutely, absolutely right. And my last question to you. As you look back at life, which has been a very successful life and a very multifaceted life, what would you say are a few lessons that you want a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take away?
Well, the first lesson is obviously to live good moral values, be trustworthy, practice what is something that is comparable in every religion, which is called the golden rule, treat others the way you would want to be treated if you were in their shoes. So that's more important than anything else. If you're honest and trustworthy, and by the way, one of the people who believes that is Warren Buffett. He talks about if you can't be honest with others, you can't be honest with yourself. So that's number one. And I've been able to stick pretty close to that all my life. The second is to be a continuous learner and learn from anybody and everybody that can teach you something. And that's something my younger son was mastered in becoming a national chess champion. He was a continuous learner. And the third is to really set out goals and just continue to pursue them, but always understand how you have to pivot or maybe take a detour, but don't give up on something you really believe in.
Correct.
And I would say those are the three things that are simplest to articulate. There's many other things. I'm a real data-driven individual, but I would say those three, they encompass quite a bit.
Absolutely. And on that note, Mike, and your three amazing lessons, live good moral values, which I think every parent teaches every child. Be a continuous learner, which is so important. And the third one, which is so powerful, set goals and pursue them. Don't give up, and yet be ready to pivot if the need arises. Thank you so much for talking to me about your own incredible journey. I think there were so many lessons that our viewers and listeners can pick up in our entire conversation. Thank you for talking to me about your journey with Pitney Bowes, and it is a major company, and you led it right from the front and right at the very top. Thank you also for talking to me about the film that you made. I'm going to look for it on Amazon Prime. But thank you for talking to me about so many different aspects of your life that I learned many things from today. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you. And again, I'm very honored to have been invited, and I very much enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.